So I'm going to choose in my 3D Lights panel at the bottom again, this middle menu, choose New Image-Based Light, and by default we actually take a white canvas or a white image and wrap it around my 3D object. That's why you can see this lighting up, and you can see that I've taken that canvas and essentially wrapped it around the scene. Okay, imagine my 3D object at the center of this axis, and this white light is wrapped around it. Now I don't want to just have a white canvas, I want to use an image. So I'm going to come over here to the middle of this panel and choose Load Texture, and I'm actually going to use the same Park Sempione image that I have as the background to light this image and use as an environment map. So you can see that I've wrapped this image essentially around this 3D object, and also I'm getting some nice reflections, and the lighting is much more matched to that of the background. I can use this light widget to rotate the scene, or rotate the light, excuse me, so that I can get the reflections exactly how I want. Now I want to remind you that you're not actually seeing the final lighting of this image, and that's because we need to be in the Adobe Ray Tracer in order to render for the final lighting effects, the reflections, the refractions, etc. To do that, I can click this first filter here, the scene filter, and further make sure I have that first scene item selected in my scene graph. And over here in the middle of that dialog, I have a quality menu. This quality menu essentially allows me to select the ray tracer or to be in an interactive or GL painting mode. This is actually is the optimum performance, so it allows for the fastest interaction speeds, etc. It's great for when you're working with your 3D object, but when you really want to see the final lighting, you need to come in here to the ray tracer. So let's go ahead and kick it into the ray trace final for now, so you can see what's happening. You see there's these blue tiles getting drawn across the image, and that's essentially progressive tiling that indicates where in the image the ray tracer is rendering for. When we stop drawing the tiles, that means that area is done rendering. If I pause it over here, I can always come to my 3D menu and resume progressive render, and it'll take off from where I left off. So you can see now that some of the shadows and some of the reflections are getting added and looking a lot better. It's a little bit aliased now, but of course I have to let the rendering do a few more passes before I get the really final look. Okay, another really handy tool that we have is the ability to do selective rendering. So if I go ahead and make a selection over any part of my object, in my 3D menu I can choose Progressive Render Selection, and it's only going to render in that area. That's pretty nice if you want to do some quick test renderings for shadows or lighting. Okay, let's go ahead and add a ground shadow to this too. The way I can turn on ground shadows is, again, in my 3D menu, I'm going to turn on the ground plane shadow catcher, and this dialog is telling me that I need to be ray tracing the object in order to see the effect. That's fine. Let's go ahead and progressively render just the selection so I can see what the shadow looks like on the ground. There you see it. You have the shadow, and this shadow is reflecting the position of the light, that infinite light that I have that I positioned. Remember, I positioned it directly perpendicular to the ground, so you can see that the shadow is lying directly underneath this car. I want to adjust the softness of the shadow in a little bit, but first, before I do so, I want to point out that in the 3D menu, the Progressive Render Selection option, there's a Command R here, and I've actually customly assigned this keyboard shortcut to that menu command. The way you can do that is come over here to the Edit menu, Keyboard Shortcuts, and find that menu item here and go ahead and add that shortcut. Okay, that's how I can do it nice and fast. Okay, so back to the shadow here. I want to actually adjust the softness of the shadow. Let's go back to my Lights panel here and choose that infinite light. And in the bottom here, the parameters, I'm going to go ahead and choose 100% softness. Okay, I want this to be as soft as possible. Pause that. Command R. Progressive render that selection. In fact, let's just select the shadow here because that's all I want to see. Okay, so that's more realistic. If you remember the image of the car on the side here on the corner, it had quite a soft shadow, so I want to kind of get that to be matched. Okay, so that looks nice here. Now the other thing that I want to fix for is the reflections. Notice that in this image, everything is reflective. You know, the tires are reflective, the car is reflective, the roof, etc. And I want to change those properties. For one, I don't want my tires to be reflective. That's not very realistic. So up here, my 3D panel, the third filter is my materials tab, and it's going to filter and show me all my different materials. A new tool that we added in Photoshop CS5, which is very, very handy, is this material selector tool. I'm going to go ahead and click that, and notice that as I click through any part of the 3D object, not only do I get a selection or a bounding selection showing me what that object is, but if I scroll through here my list of materials, you can see that we highlight it, so you can quickly identify what material it is that you want to be editing. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to choose the tires, and let's go ahead and find this. It's that first material. And down here at the bottom, with each material, shows me all the different maps and the parameters that are associated with that particular material. So you can see that this tire material is black, it has a slight bump to it, and it has a reflection property of 10. Let's go ahead and bring that down to 0. Okay. The next thing is I'm going to go through here and just click on the different parts of the car and change the reflective properties that I don't want. Let's go ahead and first get back into interactive mode because I don't need to ray trace this right now. Alright, so choose the lamp there and maybe give that 5. Choose this part. It's kind of a plastic part. Reflection 5, this black band here. Let's give it a reflective property of 7. And I'm going to choose the blue color here and actually give it more of a reflection. I want the car to be really reflective. We'll say 15. Choose that light here. Drop this down maybe to 6. Okay, so that looks pretty good. And let's do a quick check. Make a selection, Command R. And that definitely looks much better. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is actually get rid of this license plate. Now sure, I can always add a layer on top of this 3D object and mask it out, but I can actually target this mesh. This 3D artist created this car with many, many different meshes, so I can actually choose that mesh and select it. So in my scene graph, I'm going to choose this third tool in this list. This is my mesh rotation tools, and make sure that I have the mesh, my mesh is showing the second filter here, as well as in my overlays I want to make sure I have my 3D selection selected. Okay, that's going to show me the bounding box of the different meshes. So you can see as I scroll through here with my mesh tool, it's showing me a bounding box of all the mesh, different parts. So I'm going to click on that license plate, and again, if I go ahead and rotate this, you can see I'm changing the position of this, but I actually want to identify where it is in the scene graph and hide it. Notice that every mesh and material has a nice eyeball icon on the left, very familiar to Photoshop users, where I can actually click on that and hide it. Okay, I'm going to do that again because there's actually 2 meshes associated there, and find it in the scene graph, there it is, and hide that. And you can see that I've just turned that mesh off, which is pretty nice. Okay, the last thing I want to do here before I run the final rendering or the final ray trace is pop the color of this blue just a little bit. So let's go ahead and choose our material filter here, and again the material selector tool. I'm going to click on this car, the color of the car, and you can see here that diffuse color, or actually the diffuse is what is the map that defines the color of the object. If I click on that tab there, I can come over here and just use the color picker to adjust for that color and just give it just a slight brighter blue. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and run the final render, Ray Trace Final. This particular project took a little less than 7 minutes to render. I probably could have stopped it a little bit earlier. Here's the final render. A quick note on quality of the ray tracer. That depends on what setting you have. By default, we actually set it to around the mid-range. So if I go ahead and open up my properties here and select my 3D properties, you notice here that the ray tracer has this high quality threshold. This determines how many passes you do in order to consider final completed with the ray tracer. Okay. So again, here's the final image. And for this particular project, I also added a black and white adjustment layer on top of the pano to give it a different look. So thanks again for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I look forward to reading your comments and creating another tutorial for you guys. Thanks a lot.